Hi, it's Jo and Steve, and this week we're giving you a bit of an update on the latest trade insights. Our report went out this week to subscribers. We've seen another lift in trade in September, Steve.
Yeah, it's a bit of a rebound, I guess. After some quieter periods earlier in last few months. But just to put in perspective, some high-level numbers here, which are quite interesting, that showing that while the month of September was pretty strong for trade, it's lifted the last quarter. Just showing some comparisons there with where we've been, in this year to date. So trade is growing ahead of availability, which is a good thing.
So that's saying we might be running down some stocks with this trade activity.
Yeah, importantly, skim milk powder in Europe. It's making its way out to the market. So we are seeing a better balance. So milk is growing under 1% now. It has been the last 3 months globally. New Zealand going, and we'll talk more about this later, New Zealand expanding rapidly is offsetting Europe. And as we go through later in the year, where prices are, I guess, globally, we should see a bit more of that demand taken up, theoretically.
Sure.
So that's an important outlook. Looking at some overall numbers, you can see there's been a recent surge in certainly AMF and butter. That's been pretty strong. Growth in infant formula slowed down, and the dip in prices in whole milk powder has given that a little bit of a push along as well.
Yeah, that's really jumped in the last quarter. And then who's really the importers that are driving that demand? It's Southeast Asia's come back strongly in the last 3 months. Oceania no longer on the top of the import trade league table, which is comforting, really.
Yeah, and I'd expect it to slip further as we go through the next few months. Mexico's come back a bit, and so is North Africa. So yeah, getting back to some of the important developing markets we'd want to see at the top.
Sure. Whole milk powder. So this is really a story of New Zealand back in the market, but also some of these South American players coming in to the market in the last quarter, which has been interesting, and also keeping a lid on prices. Very competitive with their currencies at the moment.
Yes, they're undercutting things right now. That's the only reason the market's grown a bit, because there's some bargains out there.
Sure.
Skim milk powder, trade is up. And again, we've had an extended period of cheap product. Just a little flurry in prices in recent times, but come back again. So it's still somewhat price sensitive. I guess everyone's conditioned to the fact that we're in those low twos.
Sure, and then again in the last month, just seeing Southeast Asia coming back quite strongly at those low prices. But overall, trade in skim milk powder is still growing. And there's still a lot of stock to move, so we expect to see that continue.
Yep. Cheese is a pretty flat story.
Yeah.
Interestingly, when you take out the effects of big producers that also import, so the US, Russia, you take those factors out, and the market is growing more than 2%. So it is a little brighter than what that suggests, but it is pretty flat.
Yeah.
And very, very competitive.
And just highlighting Japan, it's a fairly important cheese market, particularly for Australia, and EU just gaining some share there in the last quarter. Yep.
Butterfat's fairly interesting. The trade remains well down. It's grown, as you saw in the earlier chart, it's grown in the last half year quite well. And that's a recovery because of very high prices. And you see that chart at the bottom there, which is really interesting. So the market has dipped quite a bit in response to the European and then New Zealand following with strong prices. Europe is backed right out of the market because their product is too expensive and they're short at home. We've seen New Zealand therefore fill some of that gap, but it's still very price sensitive out there. And the developing world, so I've separated there just those developing countries: Southeast Asia, China, MENA, and Africa, the rest of Africa, to show it's not back to where it was a couple of years ago, and probably will continue to dip now because where values are. So partly the reason why GDT's fallen, there is a lot of sensitivity to buying at prices above $5,000.
Sure, that's very stark in that chart.
Pack it up, pack it in, let me begin.
GDT
didn't have a good night.
No. This is the 7th consecutive drop in the price index, and it's really butterfat for those reasons that you just highlighted, Steve, that really copped a hammering, down around 10% for butter and AMF. Whole milk powder a little bit down, but certainly concerning for New Zealand farmers, particularly whose farm gate prices are tied to this, and they'll be reviewing those. Fonterra will be reviewing those prices based on GDT in the middle of next month. So
yeah, I think we'll look for the next update range with a 5 in it.
Yeah.
You'd expect that. Yeah, whole milk, not a surprise. It was we thought, largely factored in. But interestingly, as we go to the next chart of the week, which you've selected.
I came to get down, so get out your seat and jump around.
Yeah, my chart of the week this week is still staying with New Zealand, Steve, and it's about the growth story in October. 6.5% up in October. A very strong production result, but you've just highlighted that very weird soil anomaly map on the right-hand side there.
The weirdest one I've seen for a fair while out in New Zealand. The top being burnt off with pretty dry, and the bottom like a lake, cold and wet in the Southland, some of the wettest for a while. So some challenges ahead. We're not throwing out alarms here, but we've had very strong growth through spring past the peak. That might be challenged as we go into the shoulder. If the El Nino means something, it'll keep drying out the North Island.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a wrap.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
I won't ever slack up, punk, you better back up. Try and play the role and you're the whole crew will